One word, inclusivity. What do you think of when you see this word? The United States Constitution begins with "We the people." Back then, this only applied to white men. What about the women in our nation? For a while, women weren't included in anything. Does women not having an opinion in anything change the view of inclusivity? Yes. One big event that changed the world forever was the fight for women's suffrage, the right for women to vote. It took over 40 years to accomplish this hard-worked, effective goal. This is the story of the fight and struggle for women's suffrage.
I am woman, hear me roar, in numbers too big to ignore, and I know too much to go back and pretend.
It all began with Abigail Adams, the wife of President John Adams. On March 31, 1776, she asked her husband to make sure that women were included in the new laws he created. He refused to include women, which made Abigail upset. John Adams did not take account of women in the new laws that were made. When he said no, he was about to change society in the long run. People were going to fight and support women's rights that he didn't want to embrace. Abigail Adams was one of the first supporters of women's suffrage.
I am invincible, invincible. I am woman.
At least 50 years after Abigail Adams asked her husband to include women in the new laws, more people seemed to question whether it was okay for white men to have the privilege to vote. Different states would allow women to vote, but would quickly take the law away. Some women were surprised when the 15th Amendment was ratified in 1870. This amendment allowed African American men to vote. Women wanted to make sure that their opinion was heard as well, and that everyone else's voice was heard. There were many people that supported the women's suffrage movement. One of the main supporters was Susan B. Anthony. Anthony grew up in a reform-minded Quaker family. This meant that they wanted to seek change in the world in some way. She started caring about women's rights at a young age. At first, she held back from the women's rights movement, but starting in 1852, she was a proud supporter. Susan B. Anthony was the chief organizer for the women's rights organization. An event she gained her fame was when she voted in Rochester. Anthony rebelled by registering and placing a ballot during the election in Rochester. She was arrested, tried, and had to pay a $100 fine. Also, she was the president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Susan B. Anthony went on tour to speak and share her stories and opinions on why women should be allowed to vote. While speaking at these events, she drew large crowds. A famous quote by her is, "Failure is impossible." This quote defines her, as well as her dreams for everyone else. Susan B. Anthony was a strong, independent woman that had a passion for allowing women to vote.
I am invincible, invincible. I am one.
Like John Adams, there were many other presidents that didn't think women deserved the same chance to express their opinion and deserved as many opportunities as men. A president that had a different point of view from this issue was President Woodrow Wilson. Actually, at first, Wilson wasn't fully aware of the rejection women were receiving. The issue finally caught his attention when there were women picketing at the White House in 1917. After that, he was a women's rights and suffrage activist. On September 30th, 1918, he called a joint session of Congress. This session was to discuss the Women's Suffrage Amendment, which would become known as the 19th Amendment. The idea of the Women's Suffrage Amendment began when the 15th Amendment was passed, which allowed African American men to vote. Women thought that they should also be allowed to vote. Many women, like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, urged Congress to propose a law that would ensure women's right to vote. James Brooke, a Democratic New York representative, was the first to offer the Women's Suffrage Amendment to Congress. In 1914, the Senate voted 35-34 for the amendment. After many congressional votes on women's suffrage amendment, Woodrow Wilson called a joint session of Congress to discuss this amendment on September 30th, 1918. The House of Representatives had already accepted the amendment, but the Senate still needed to in order of it becoming a law. On February 10, 1919, the president was only one vote short. Even though his amendment wasn't passed yet, Wilson kept trying. Finally, on August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed. It proclaimed that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. There were many people that were against this act, but the state legislature couldn't vote for a proposed amendment until after the election. This amendment was also known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment because of her passion and work towards getting this amendment passed. After the 19th Amendment was passed, women were allowed to vote. So, 2 ladies in Maryland went to vote for the election. Surprisingly, they were arrested. This is the case of Lesser v. Garnett in 1922. The women testified and said that the arrest was unconstitutional. Oscar Lesser claimed that the 19th Amendment was not accepted in the state of Maryland. Obviously, this wouldn't be possible if the new law applied to every state in the United States. A contention that Lesser testified was that the power of the amendment was not enough to apply to the Constitution. Also, he said that it wasn't fair that the legislators didn't have the power to ratify the amendment. In the end, the girls weren't charged. This case was sort of a ridiculous way of showing how the hatred of the 19th Amendment. Women were allowed to vote, and no one could stop them from doing so.
In 85, Tuesday morning came alive.
The meaning of inclusivity was finally straightened out. Women were included in all laws, and everybody was treated as an equal. It was a fight and a real battle for this dream of many to come true. Every climb has ups and downs, but once it's over, it's such a great feeling. With the help of many supporters and a couple of haters, women have the right to vote is a reality. The United States of America is a place where you have freedom. It is a place for everyone to share and express their opinion. If women weren't allowed to vote, they wouldn't be allowed to say anything that they wanted. This is why every woman in the United States should be granted the right to vote. I hope this video informed you about the women's suffrage. Thanks for watching.
Maybe this'll be my year. 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 In 92, boys born, skies were blue in Ohio. Boris Yeltsin chills, Freddie dies, but Queen is still. Barcelona has the games.